incognito. But we're a Christian Leaders Institute, and I'm going with them to a conference, so I won't be there this Sunday. So I thought I'd come to you in Henry Ryanga's car. Thanks, Henry.
You're welcome. Preach it.
If you hear some beeping, it's because this car is going over a center line, and there it goes. And so if it goes really loud, it's just before we hit a tree. But I want
another car.
Or another car, yes. I want to talk. We're in a series on reading. We're reading through the whole Bible, and we read this past week on Elijah. And I want to talk about, through that story, the topic of depression. Excited, Henry?
Shoot me, like whoa, like I just.
We want to look at perhaps why people get depressed and what can be done about it. But on the other hand, I don't want it to be some easy thing. I know some of you have gone through it personally. Maybe you're going through it now, or you know people, and people will have their suggestions. Just get over it. Just keep busy, and some of those suggestions can help. But I know some of you struggled through many things. You prayed to your knees were rubbed raw, and there's no sometimes easy answer to it. And my wife is reading this book by Lou Smedes, My God and I, a spiritual memoir. He wrote it just before he died. And he talks about a time when he went through depression, and I like what he wrote. He said that there was a point where he was really depressed. He was in some little cabin in some remote island in Puget Sound. But he writes, on Tuesday afternoon of the third week, while I was pacing the living room floor, I seemed to hear the voices of everyone whose approval I had lived for. My friends, my family, and especially my mother. Each of them came to me in turn, and each of them said the same thing. I cannot help you. I felt as if I were sinking into the ocean within arm's reach of a boat full of loved ones who put their arms around their chests and shook their heads as I went down. Then God came back. He broke through my terror and said, I will never let you fall. I will always hold you up. And then when I heard him speak, or as some of my friends say, imagine that I heard him speak, I felt as if I had been lifted from a black pit straight up into joy. Never before had I been so suddenly released from the devil of despair. Never had I known such an amazing grace, never before such elation. I have not been neurotically depressed since that day, though I must, to be honest, tell you that God also comes to me each morning and offers me a 20 milligram capsule of Prozac. I like that because he's being honest that, yes, God can lift you out of despair, but sometimes other things are needed. And I'm not going to suggest that what I say today is exactly what you need, but it might help you understand some things, and it might actually help you do some things, but it's not everything that could be said. I want to start with the story of Elijah. It's chapter 19 of 1 Kings, this part. Queen Jezebel has just put a death warrant on Elijah's head, and Elijah is discouraged, he's depressed, he runs away, he's afraid for his life, and he comes to Beersheba. Then Elijah walked for a whole day into the desert. He sat down under a bush and asked to die. I've had enough, Lord. And maybe some of you feel that way about something. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's things that are happening at work. Or maybe you once were excited about your faith and now it leaves you with nothing but dust and ashes. And maybe something you've been working hard on and it's going nowhere, and you feel like saying these same things. I've had enough, Lord. He prayed, let me die. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under a tree and slept. I think to understand maybe how he felt, you have to go back 3 years earlier. 3 years earlier, God told Elijah to tell the people of Israel that there was going to be a famine. God had it with the people King Ahab, a bad king, married to a bad wife, Jezebel. In fact, that's a term that we still give women today who are bad. You don't want to name your kid Jezebel.
Okay, no, I've avoided that with my daughters.
Yes. So he predicts this famine. Of course, no one likes the person that gives the bad news, and so he goes underground, and he has a tough go of it for 3 years. Nothing happens. Everyone's upset, and he's sort of wasting the prime of his life. And after 3 years, God comes and says, I want you to go to King Ahab and say that the famine is lifted. So the next thing we read is that Elijah is wanting this big contest. God didn't say have a big contest, but that's what Elijah does. A big contest on Mount Carmel, and between Elijah, the prophet of God, and the local god Baal. And the local god had 450 prophets. So it's 450 prophets against one. And that's never good odds.
No.
450 to 1's not good odds. Although, Henry, you have to tell the story.
Okay, I'll try to stay on the road while you're telling the story.
Stay on the road.
Okay.
When I was 12 years old, my parents dropped my brother and I off at the local YMCA downtown Grand Rapids, the old YMCA, with 450 other kids. There were 448.
Really?
Yes.
Is this a true story?
It's a true story. It was a Lord of the Flies kind of a thing.
Okay.
And it was crazy.
I don't think I've ever heard this story.
No.
I've heard most of your stories.
Yes. No, this is a good one.
Okay.
At least for me. There were 450 kids, and we played dodgeball. There's a line, and there's 225 kids on one side, 225 on the other, and the idea is you take a ball and you try to get the other people.
Game.
Okay.
Like you throw the balls at people. Do they even allow that game today?
Probably not.
Okay.
So there were so many kids on one side that I just sat in the back and didn't do anything until things thinned out. And then soon it was 30 on 30, and soon it was 3 against 1. And I was the only one left on my team.
Really?
And one by one, I got those other guys out, and so I, out of 450 kids, was the only one left.
Wow.
So it can be done. And this has nothing to do with the sermon,
So
but
what's the
it's
point?
a great
Is
story.
there a point?
There's no point. But
No point to that.
But
Okay.
it was a cool thing that happened to me when I was 12. All right.
I can relate.
Yes. So they have this contest. The contest was build an altar, and you pray to your God. If he sends fire, then that's the winner. And so the prophets of Baal, they go first, and they're dancing, and they're singing, and they're praying. And Elijah, after a few hours is, making fun of them. Call louder. Maybe your God is sleeping. Maybe he's watching the latest thing of Netflix. Something. Make some noise. Make it happen. And of course, the fire doesn't come. Then it's Elijah's turn. And what Elijah does is he digs a big ditch and he pours water, gallon after gallon of water, over the sacrifice. Now you got to ask yourself, well, why would he do that?
I've asked myself that in my entire ministry life. Why do you do that?
Well, I think the traditional thing was that he did that so that people would know that this is the one true God. But I think he did it because he wanted to know if God was going to do something or not. For 3 years, God had done nothing. Nothing's going on. It wasn't God's idea to have this contest in the first place. Elijah is the one who was struggling with God and what he was doing or not doing. He was frustrated, and so Elijah wanted God to show up in a dramatic way to prove that he was real to Elijah. And if you want God to prove that he's real, you don't make it easy.
Right.
I
remember I was 12. I was arguably the worst basketball player in our little school. There's no question. And the other team from Waupun knew that. And we were at the end of the game, and I was the 6th player, and the guy fouled out, so I had to go in for whatever reason. And they fouled me with 1 second left, and I had to make 2 free throws. but they followed me. They knew I was the worst. So anyway, the coach, who happened to be my uncle, said, "Look at me. You gotta make these. You don't make them. That's it." And I was like, I will never make it. But I thought to myself, I cannot let my uncle down. And I made both free throws. So I don't know what that relates to.
Good
I was
story,
thinking
though.
about you. I was 12.
Yes.
You got me thinking of 12.
Yes.
And I was daydreaming a little bit, honestly, and when you were talking about Elijah. So I was thinking about that.
Good. So he throws the water. He kneels down to pray, and my guess is he didn't know if God was going to show up or not.
Right, I can understand that.
And then fire comes from heaven. God shows up in this incredible, dramatic way, and he's excited. He's elated. They've won the contest, and he runs down the hill, and he outruns the chariot of King Ahab. It couldn't have worked out better. Finally, God did something. He made the basket.
I see that.
Everything was great. God is real, and everyone knows he's real, and everyone knows that Elijah is the man that is making things happen.
Yeah.
So he's excited. He goes to bed, he's excited. Next day, he finds out that Queen Jezebel wants him dead. And so now he runs. And that's where I want to start talking about I want to give five things that depression the things you need to understand about depression, or why we sometimes get depressed. And I think the first is this post-great thing syndrome. You have this great thing that happens to you, and then there's a letdown after it. At Christmas, you're looking forward to it, and then come January, there's that little bit of depression. But it can happen with almost anything. It can happen when you first get married. It can happen when you first have a child, postpartum depression. It can happen in almost every area of your life. It can happen to your own faith walk. You become a Christian, you're excited about it, you go to a church, everything's excited, and then all of a sudden there's a letdown, and things don't look as good. And there's sort of this high-low thing. And I think the thing that we fail to understand is that life is that way. Life is like a roller coaster. Sometimes there's this high, a great thing, but sometimes it's often balanced with something low.
Right? It's like life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what
That's
you're
right.
gonna get.
Life is like a roller coaster, and when you're experiencing the high, be prepared for the dip when it goes down. And sometimes when people experience that with faith, they had such a they go on a retreat and it's a high, or they volunteer for a summer somewhere at a church or some mission program, and every day they're into the Word, and it's exciting, and they're with these people that are committed, and it's passionate. And then they go back and they get married and they have kids and they go to church, and life is filled with all kinds of ordinary stuff, and it's just not as exciting as it was. And so then they stop going to church, and they stop doing these things because they remember a time when God was really real, and now that it's sort of ordinary, it just doesn't do anything. And so they get kind of discouraged and depressed. So that's number one. Number two, Elijah goes into the desert. He's tired. He's tired from the contest, tired from the 3 years. He's tired from walking into the desert, and he just goes to sleep. And that's when he talks to God, and he's really depressed. And sometimes just being tired. I read some article that most Americans don't get enough sleep. And a lot of people say, well, I just don't need much sleep, or I can't sleep. But why can't we sleep? A lot of times we can't sleep because we have a million things going on in our minds. A lot of things, all the things, our to-do lists, and all the things we should be doing, and all the things we're behind. We live in a busy world filled with all kinds of choices and activities, and I think we're being inundated with these things. I read an article that suggested that more young people in college today are suffering or reporting symptoms of depression than at any other time. Number three, Elijah, one of the things he says to God, he's angry, he's upset. God asks, "Why are you here?" And he says, one of the things he says is, "I'm no better than my ancestors. I've failed to lead the people. Nothing good is happening. Your program is dead in the water, and I'm no better than my ancestors." And when you start comparing yourself to other people, you're always going to find someone who's better than you at whatever it is, and that's depressing. Number 4, loneliness. And I don't know whether depression makes people lonely or loneliness makes people depressed, or maybe they somehow go together. But one thing I've noticed over the last 35 years, maybe you've noticed that too, Henry, is that when people are depressed, they stay away from church.
Yeah, they kind of run away from church.
Yeah.
Stay away.
It's what they need most,
right.
but so once you get down and discouraged, you stop being around people, which makes you all the more lonely and more discouraged.
You know, I've noticed, I'm part of a group. Jeff Alcart from Alcart Chevrolet gave me this thing, Be Nice. It's about depression and suicide. It's right there. Okay. You can't see it. And he talks about how when people start doing that, what you want to do is you want to be nice. And so here's the thing right here. Okay, be nice. And be nice is, first of all, be there for someone. And then N is notice. Like if somebody all of a sudden is not, if they're always on time and now they're not showing up, give them a call. Notice, hey, I noticed that you've been late recently. Is everything okay? And then the I, that's actually what that is, initiate the conversation. So notice, initiate the conversation. And then the C is, to care, to actually, at some point, even ask the question, hey, have you ever thought about suicide? Now, again, this sermon is just a sermon, and what I'd like you to do is to benice.org. Just go to that website, and it talks about people in your life who all of a sudden have a deep darkness that comes upon them, and to, empathize with them, and the Be Nice is the thing here. So anyway, just a little plug for Be Nice.
Number 5, no purpose. Everything that Elijah was trying to do, the program of God and what God was trying to make happen, it all seemed so dead, and his role in it. Here he had this big contest. Everyone, saw how powerful God was, and everyone's excited, and the next day he's running for his life. So what is the point of the whole thing? And maybe you're in a job where you wonder, what am I doing? What am I accomplishing? Or maybe your family and your marriage hasn't turned out the way you wish it would, and it's like, life is not going the way I would like. Or maybe your own walk with God, or your purpose in it. We pastors always talk about people and how everyone has a purpose in God's kingdom, and you keep hearing it, but you still don't know what your purpose is. So it's discouraging. It's hard to keep the passion when you don't know what it is that you should be passionate about. Finally, number 6, I think the whole depression thing is a running. Elijah's running away because he doesn't know what else to do. And I've seen people in their depression, they run away from church, they run away from their marriages, they run away from their family, run away from their job, their responsibilities. It's like, I just want to get away. I want to get off the merry-go-round. So that's sort of some of the things going on in this passage, some of the causes and things we need to understand about depression, but what sort of helpful things are in this passage? So I just have a few, and again, they're not an exhaustive list. Maybe there are some things that you've already tried, but this is what I saw in this passage. Number 1, eat right and sleep as often as you can. I like that one, sleeping. Eating right, the artificial things that we take in, that everything has corn syrup in it. We've all heard about this, but it's like we can't get away from it. Fast food restaurants all the time, we're busy. But all these things are affecting our minds. Sleep, I already talked about that. Number 2, I think this is the biggest thing that I got out of this passage. and that is to go back. Go back to a time when God was close to you. Go back to a time when something was good. Right now, you're not feeling like things are good, but go back to a time when things were good. Let me read from 1 Kings again. Later the Lord's angel came to him a second time. The angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat. If you don't, the journey will be too hard for you." So Elijah got up and ate and drank. The food made him strong enough to walk for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Zion, the mountain of God. The mountain of God was where Moses received the Ten Commandments.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. And how long were the children of Israel wandering in the desert?
40 years.
40 years. So Elijah goes back 40 days, symbolic of those 40 years. So God, in a way, he probably didn't even know where he was going or what he was doing, but God was taking him back to where it all started. People came out of slavery. They had no idea who they were. And so God gave them the Ten Commandments to show them who God was and what he wanted for them. He's bringing back Elijah to the place where the whole program of God started. Now, remember, Elijah is thinking that the program of God is dead. We just did this Mount Carmel thing, great victory. Next day it comes to nothing.
Right.
There's no other prophet. It was 450 prophets of Baal against one. I'm the last one. They want to kill me. The program of God is dead.
I can understand how you can feel sorry for yourself, though. I mean, in general.
Yeah.
I mean, like you know, you're close to the Lord, you're living life, and I mean, I've been at this for 30 some years, and there are times when you just feel abandoned, even in ministry, and you say, God, where are you?
Right. So Elijah comes back to the place where it all started, but maybe we need to do that same kind of thing. For me, in college, I had a problem where trying to understand God's grace, and I read a book that where the author talked about the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. So that's a place that I go to. A phrase that I often use on myself when I am faced with something difficult, or I don't know if I can do it, or I'm excessively worried about it and it's depressing me, is this is the phrase I use on myself: 100 years from now, what difference does it make?
I've heard you say that 100 times. No, I have. Seriously, I've heard him say that.
So that gets me over.
I say that now too. Like it's like a virus, I call it, a positive virus.
Right. It's because the thing that I'm worried about is not that big a deal in the big scheme of things. Or, you know, if I'm struggling in my marriage, I go back to my vows. If I struggle with my passion for this job and for Christ and for his cause, I go back to a thing that happened to my brother and I. I was driving in my Volkswagen Bug after a game that we had, and it was a Friday, and I was driving in a Volkswagen Beetle, and right on the windshield there was a bug that went splat right over the whole thing. And I thought about that bug. It's Friday, the bug is coming home after a hard week of work,
Of
bugging around, and he's thinking about
Mrs. Bug.
yeah, ladybug.
I'm in the story.
Ladybug.
Ladybug. Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe she's making the Friday dinner and the mashed potatoes and the baked ham or whatever it might be. And he's right in the middle of this thought, and it's the weekend. He's so excited, and all of a sudden, splat. His life is over. He didn't see the Volkswagen Bug coming to him. He had no time to get prepared. He existed, and now he doesn't. And I remember thinking about that if there is no God, when we die, we're not sitting in some bug graveyard, contemplating how we died or how we should have done. We're just gone. And that hit me so powerfully that if there is meaning to anything that I do in this day, it's because there's a God and he has a purpose. And if there is a God and he has a purpose, then what does he want me to do? I only have a short time on this planet. What does he want me to do with that time? So you got to go back to your time or your passage or the thing that makes a difference for your life when you're feeling this way. Number 3, find God in the small. God finally brings Elijah to the mountain of God, and he goes out on the mountain, and an earthquake happens, fire happens, but God wasn't in the earthquake. He wasn't in the fire, which I think was interesting because God was in the fire on Mount Carmel.
Right.
When Elijah prayed and God sent fire, it's like, yeah, that's how we want God. That's what we want you to do. We want you to show up in this incredible, fantastic, dramatic way, so we absolutely know that you're there and you're taking care of us and that everything is going to work out.
That's what goes. The basketball goes in the
Yes,
bucket.
we want that success.
Yeah.
But in this story, God is not in the fire. He's not in the earthquake. He's in a still small voice. Try to find God in the small things, in a sunset, in a bird that flies by, or in the smile of a grandson, or in one verse that you read that touches you, or someone that emails you at just the right time just to say that they care. Look for God in those small things. Number 4, realize God has a bigger plan than just what's happening around you. So what the small voice says to Elijah is, he says to Elijah, and he says this at the very end, he says, by the way, Elijah, you're not the only one. There are 8,000 people who are serving me that have not bent their knee to the Baals. They're serving me that you don't know about. So a lot of times we feel like we're alone in our pain and our suffering, and we feel like God has forgotten us, and the plan of God is dead all around us. But God he's involved in a bigger plan, and we're part of that bigger plan. And that's really the last thing. The last thing is believe that God has a plan for you. So that's what God says to Elijah too. He says, he doesn't argue with it. Elijah complains, God, these are bad things. Nothing's happening. And now they're trying to kill me as the only prophet. And God doesn't argue with him. He just says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back. I want you to anoint this person the king. I want you to get your apprentice Elisha. And he lists off 4 things. Elijah, this is what I want you to do. Quit feeling sorry for yourself and get out there and do the thing that I need you to do. So maybe I guess that's the last thing. You're not the whole plan, but you are part of the plan. God does have a special role for you. You might not know where it is. You might not know where it is, because in this story, you might be 3 years in the famine, or you might be coming down from the high of Mount Carmel, or you might be wandering in the desert, wanting to die. You could be any place in this story. But God's story for you can end just like it did for Elijah. God does have a plan for you. And all the things that you're going through, the hard times, the difficult things, God won't waste any of it.
That's really cool.
Well, I hope you enjoyed your time with us. It's starting to rain outside. You can see out there.
Rain happens.
Rain happens.
Yeah.
It could be raining outside, but you can still enjoy it inside.
I was listening to your sermon, and I was thinking, like when Elijah got Elisha going, and then they even got a school of the prophets, so there's like no prophets.
Right.
They got a school of the prophets. I always think
So it went from total depression,
Yeah.
I'm the only one left, they're trying to kill me, to a whole school of prophets.
Yeah, ministry training everywhere.
There you go.
That's pretty cool. Anyway, thanks for letting me be a part of this. Wow, you are such an amazing preacher. That's what I say.
Let's pray together. Father God, though the rain may be falling in our own lives, we recognize that these words written so many years ago are also for us. that the great prophet Elijah also went through a time of discouragement and doubt. And when that happens to us, Lord, help us, as Steve reminded us, to remember the bigger picture. We are not here for our sake. You have already saved us. You have already promised us new life in Christ. We have read the whole book, a benefit that Elijah and the prophets never had. We got to read the end of the book. We see your ultimate victory over death and over sin and over the curse that lays upon this world, that all shall be broken, and at your return, inaugurating a new kingdom in its completion. So why are we still here? What is our purpose? If we have already gained access to that through the blood of Christ, it's for the sake of those who don't yet know. You indeed have a bigger picture, and we get to be a part of directing people towards that. Lord, may that excite us and encourage us when we're down and when we're doubting, to know that you've got it. The Lord himself goes before us and will be with us wherever we go. And so, Lord, as we sing this closing song about you, how you lift us out of the miry pit and set our feet upon a rock and make our footsteps firm, Lord, help us to own it. Help us to own that truth and to be able to share that hope that we have with others. We ask it in the name of Jesus, and let God's people say, Amen. If you are new visiting with us, at this time there's a little slip in your program where you can tell us who you are and how it is that you got to be with us. Or maybe you have a response or prayer request in reaction to Steve's message. As we take the offering, you can tear that off and put that in the basket. But our offering will be also gathered at this time while we sing our closing song from Psalm 40.
Wait patiently for the Lord. He will turn, and he will hear your cry.
Waiting patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit.
When Steve was sharing his touchstones, where he goes back and is encouraged by the things of the Word or things in his life, or even reminders that, hey, look, God's got this all. 100 years from now, it's still in God's hand. I thought he was also going to go back to this verse, which was a verse given to him at his ordination, and also that he gave to me at my ordination, which I now give to you, from Deuteronomy 31, verse 8. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And let God's people say, amen. And let God's people sit down. We have an event now that is semi